I snuck out to cheat on our anniversary. He found out after I got pregnant. His revenge was cold. I'm pregnant. And it's not for my husband, and he found out about it and is bent on not only ruining my life, but that of my lover's. I don't care about my lover's life right now, though. I just want Steve to forgive me and accept me back. I'm willing to do anything, including getting rid of the baby, just to get him to forgive me again. But I've told him that and begged him too, on my knees crying and showing him how deeply I regret the things I did. But Steve is just so angry and wants nothing else but to destroy me. My name is Evie, and I actually am here to ask for your advice. I know I did something really horrible, but I desperately need my husband to forgive me, guys. I need it so badly. I snuck out to cheat on Steve with my lover, and my husband found out after I got pregnant, and wants nothing to do with me again, but everything to do with ruining me. Before you judge me, hear me out first, please. Steve and I have been married for close to a year now, and we met through work. I work as a secretary in my company, and I work closely with my boss, so I went everywhere he went and did all the necessary jobs a secretary would do. Steve owned a business, and my boss was desperate to do business with him, so he kept badging him for an appointment to hear his proposal for months before Steve finally agreed to meet him. It was a merger of some sort. Our company was going under because of the debts accumulated over the years, and there was no way to survive except to sell the company, but I suggested partnership with another company to my boss, and he had gladly accepted the idea, and the best person to partner with to help the company had been Steve. He was supposed to help pay off the debts as his investment in the company. It was a long shot because it was almost impossible for someone with such a huge company that Steve had to be interested in our small business. But eventually, when we got an appointment with Steve, he agreed to invest in the company under the condition that he would get to monitor the cash flow and that everything was reported to him. Steve had actually invested in the company I worked for because he wanted to get to know me, but I didn't know that from the beginning. All I knew was that I found him very attractive and rich. So the moment Steve paid me small attention, I jumped on it fast. I remember when he had first asked me out on a date, he had taken me to one of the most famous restaurants that would take months to get a booking, and also very expensive to even eat at. I remember that I kept trying to stare at everything classy. I had read everything the media had to say about Steve before coming there. I even watched about 2 to 3 interviews of him talking about his business, and then about his personal interest. I memorized everything so I could interest Steve more. When we ordered, I ordered his favorite and pretended to be surprised, claiming it was my favorite too when he ordered the same thing. I talked about his interests as if they were mine, and I made sure I presented myself as the perfect woman for him. Steve was clearly impressed and took me on another date this time to an event as his date. I was happy when I got to meet all those important people I had only ever dreamt about meeting. It was fun, and just after a month of going out with Steve, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I was so happy, but I tried to keep everything a secret, especially from my boss. I didn't want him thinking that I was taking advantage of the fact that we had someone as important as that in our company, and I knew he would possibly feel threatened by it if he found out, because Steve could easily displace him and put another CEO. So I kept things quiet and professional anytime we had a meeting with Steve. I moved in with Steve after dating him for 3 months, but I still managed to keep everything from my boss and everybody else except my friends and my family. Steve told me he didn't want such a secret relationship, that no one would know about it, and so, as a compensation, I introduced him to a few of my friends, and also my mom and my siblings. They loved him instantly, perhaps because of the bulky and expensive gifts he bought them on the first day of meeting them. But that would be a lie, knowing who my mother is. She simply loved him because he was respectful and kind, and he definitely loved me, so she approved of our relationship. Although I cannot say the same of Steve's family. They never liked me right from the start, even though they said nothing in particular, mostly because of Steve. But their disapproval shone in their eyes and in their actions rather than in their words, especially his sister, who seemed to think I came to snatch her brother away from her. But I didn't really care about them. I had bigger things to worry about, especially after Steve finally proposed after 8 months of being together. I remember it being so romantic with the music in the background and my family on one side cheering and his own family on the other side clearly unhappy and trying to pretend they were. Steve even gave me a gift when I accepted his proposal, a brand new car and an apartment to do whatever I wanted with it. Of course, I moved my family into the apartment almost immediately because the place they stayed was originally bad, and they barely managed because they had no choice. I was so happy, but then by Monday the news had spread across social media and also the office that I was marrying the billionaire Steve. Some called me a gold digger on the internet, others got some more interesting adjectives to qualify me, and others genuinely congratulated me while some were envious and showed it in their comments. Although I spent that evening scrolling through social media and reading through every comment and even attacking all the haters with words of mine through a fake account I created. That was still the least of my worries. I didn't mind their anger or jealousy as much as I minded one thing. I didn't even mind Steve's family being uncomfortable around me as much as I mind just this exact same thing, and it really manifested when I got to the office. Chris was very livid. Chris, my boss, was so angry and kept throwing insults at me and not minding that the other staff could hear him cussing me out. I tried so much to calm him down, and he had only done so after he dragged me against the desk and pushed me forward against it and dragged my skirt alongside my panties off my waist and had his aggressive way with me. Yes. The reasons why Chris felt threatened about my relationship with Steve and why I hadn't told him about it from the beginning was because Chris and I have been friends with benefits for a long time, even before he got to inherit the company from his father. We attended the same college and due to some unforeseen circumstances became housemates. Chris actually accepted me living with him because I couldn't afford my rent, because I was paying my tuition fees myself. I was in love with Chris for over 4 years before I eventually stopped being in love with him. Chris knew that and took advantage of that. Chris had many friends while we were in school, and he was always going from one party to another and either came home smelling of alcohol and female perfume, or he came home with a different girl on his arms each night. I was used to seeing him like that, and although it hurt terribly, I never thought Chris would like me enough to even want to have sex with me. But all that had changed one night when he came home drunk as usual, but without a female in his arms, and he wasn't even reeking of female perfume. Chris found me in my room and had proceeded to have sex with him. I didn't object or deny him. I have always imagined us doing it anyway, so I didn't mind the slurring over me or the painful penetration when he finally disvirgined me. I thought even though he was drunk, he needed me, and even his drunk self recognized that fact, so in my head the sex sealed our relationship and we had started dating. But it wasn't the same for Chris. He clearly remembered the sex because he had teased me for remaining a virgin until that night and said nothing else about it. And every night for about 2 weeks after that night, Chris and I kept having sex, so I really did assume we were together until the 3rd week that Chris had brought home another girl. I excused it as a drunken mistake. It couldn't have been easy trying to stay off other girls and being committed to another relationship, especially after always having his fill with different girls all the time. But then the same thing had happened the 2nd night, and then the 3rd all with different girls. The ones he could barely remember their names by morning, and I couldn't bear it anymore. So I confronted him that night with the girl he was kissing seconds ago, scowling at me. I remember how Chris had laughed and reached for the bottle of alcohol on his table before telling me that we were only friends with benefits and that I shouldn't delude myself into thinking we were anything more. I was so hurt, and I remember avoiding him for days after, which was quite difficult because we lived together. Chris never apologized for his words, though, and it was obvious he meant it. Eventually, Chris had come to me again for sex, and I gave in to him. I couldn't resist him. I loved him. And years after, even when that love disappeared and was replaced by just mutual friendship feeling, I still couldn't bring myself to say no to Chris any time he wanted to have sex with me, even after he got married to Christine. Chris got married to Christine, a girl his mother wanted for him after we graduated, and he started working in his father's company as the CEO and taking me along to be his secretary, even though I studied nothing of business. But I understood that it was because he wanted me close, so I did my very best and was learning along the way. It was difficult, of course, because Chris spent every money that came his way, including the company's money. He was one reason why we were in debt and had to look for an investor. When Chris married Kristen only a year after graduation, despite the fact that we were still sleeping together, I was so angry and pained because of how little I meant to him, and I proceeded to start having boyfriends too. But it only made Chris jealous, and every time he tried to ruin my relationship. One time, when I had gotten rather serious with a guy I met, Ben, Chris tried everything to ruin that relationship, and had done so eventually after 2 months of the relationship. I don't know what he told Ben, but Ben had accused me of being a slut and threw me out of his house around 2 a.m. Chris had of course known what he did because immediately I called him. He rushed over to pick me up and took me to a hotel and soothed me with the only means he knew, which was sex. We continued this back and forth relationship between us, even after his wife got pregnant with their first child, and barely a year after birth, got pregnant again with their second child. Chris made me feel important every time we slept together. He would complain about how incompetent his wife was in bed and how she could hardly satisfy him. He made me feel like I was the only woman in his life who he could trust and have sex with and feel satisfied. I knew everything about Chris, and he knew everything about me. Well, except when I started dating Steve. Trying to keep a relationship a secret from Chris was the hardest because of how much of my time he always demanded both at work and in his bed. And trying to also make time for Steve every time he needed me, so he wouldn't suspect anything, especially when he knew the exact running of the company and when I should be busy and not busy. So I had to invent an imaginary friend who always had issues in her marriage with her abusive husband and was always calling me anytime she was down. To Chris, it was some hobby I picked up and was invested in learning so much that I used every of my spare time for it. But when the news of the proposal came out, Chris was furious that I kept such a secret from him, and only after he had his way with me several times was he able to calm down and ask me the questions he needed to ask. He made me promise that I would never leave the office or try to quit. He made me promise that I will still always be available for him, even after marriage, just the way he made himself available for me. And I promised him all that, just to make him happy, and also because I feared that he had evidence to reveal to Steve about our relationship. That particular sex video we made in college while having sex was enough to put Steve off, even if Chris and I were no longer together then. I know it was stupid of me to allow him to make a video of us having sex, but he had convinced me to participate, and it was during those first 2 weeks that I thought we were truly in a relationship, so I allowed him to make him happy. Chris never deleted the video after that. He kept it locked on his phone, and even though he's changed his phone numerous times because of how much he smashed them whenever he got upset, he still managed to have the video locked in every device he had. And even though I knew all his passwords, for some weird reason, I didn't know the password to access that particular video, and whenever I begged him to delete the video, he told me I looked good in it, and he watched it every night to have a good sleep beside his heavily pregnant wife, who apparently slept like a truck. So I didn't want to upset him too much and make him give that video to Steve. Although I knew that he would definitely lose his partnership with Steve, that was the main reason he wasn't matching Steve's office and showing him the proof of me being his whore. After finally settling Chris with all those promises, he finally resigned to his fate that I would be getting married. He even attended the wedding, even though he left halfway to my relief because I had imagined all sorts of things like him opposing the wedding or him showing Steve the video right before the wedding vows, or maybe even after. And knowing Steve, who didn't tolerate any form of cheating, he would definitely be getting an annulment as soon as he could. But in the end, a final separation had happened after Steve eventually found out about my affair with Chris, which continued after the wedding, even more than before I was married. Chris seized every opportunity we had to have sex with me. He was always demanding to have sex and trying to hide the relationship I had with him from Steve, especially after marriage was even more exhausting. It was like Chris definitely was trying to frustrate by making sexual demands every time. He made sure to have sex with me so roughly, I become so tender on most days, and I avoid sex with Steve. I kept lying to Steve about my avoidance being related to trying to save the company and also adjusting to married life. Steve was caring and understood. He never demanded sex from me, except I felt very guilty for treating him like that when he didn't deserve it, and I was the one reaching for him, and he never turned me away whenever I did that. I was starting to get really frustrated with Chris's attitude, and one time I refused to have sex with him. We were at the office and we had a client coming in the next hour. I brought him the documents to see to know the things to say because I apparently did all the work in the company, but instead of reaching for the documents in front of him, Chris was reaching for my zippers, and I refused him. We lost that potential client that day because Chris had become so angry and just left work leaving me to handle the client. And even though I said everything right, The client felt insulted that it was a secretary attending to him and not my boss, and he said he couldn't do business with us. I was so pissed at Chris, and Steve found out about the client we lost and Chris's part in it. He threatened to remove Chris from the position and put me there, and as much as I liked that being true, because I literally was the one holding the company together, I couldn't risk Chris losing out like that, because it meant he had nothing to lose if he decided to turn in the video to Steve, so I managed to convince Steve not to do that, and lied about him being the talent in the company instead or me. Steve didn't believe me, obviously, but he just let it go. I cannot pinpoint how Steve started to suspect me cheating with Chris, or how he had gotten his evidence. I thought I was perfectly good at hiding the affair. I thought I covered up perfectly, but guess I left traces all around, or maybe Steve was just smarter than I gave him credit for. But then, it must have been stupid of me to undermine Steve. He wouldn't be handling the huge company he had successfully if he wasn't smart. But I thought everything was really fine until our anniversary. I shot myself in the foot first. Chris had, as usual, told me he wanted to have sex, but this time, he wanted me to spend the night at his place and tell my husband anything I could think of. We usually did that whenever his wife wasn't around with the kids. She went occasionally to her mother's place and took the kids along, leaving the house to Chris and inevitably me too. But that was all before I got married. I stopped doing it after marriage, and I made different excuses to Chris every time he suggested it. I even started praying that his wife never traveled, but she hadn't for a while because of her third pregnancy and how sick she usually was. But for some reason, which I'm sure has a Chris factor in it, she decided to give birth in a midwife's place, and it was close to her mother's place, so she decided to stay there for a month with the rest of their kids. And it left me in a tight spot, because Chris kept bothering me to sleep over despite the fact that we still have sex countless times in the office. I didn't know what to do, but I kept refusing his offer until that day. We were at the office as usual, even though I told Chris that my anniversary was that day, and I wanted the day off. He had come up with some work emergency, and guilt tripped me into showing up. I was going to use the day to shop for the dress I would wear and get ready to go out with my husband to the restaurant we made a reservation at so we could celebrate, but that plan had been dashed, and I went to work instead. As suspected, there was no work emergency. Chris just wanted me to have sex again, and I eventually gave in just to make him happy, and I was finally able to go home mid-afternoon. There was no time to shop again, so I just put on a dress I had and had only worn once to an event with Steve, did my makeup and was about to leave to go meet Steve, who had to go to work that day and was going to come directly from there. But Chris called me and blackmailed me to come over to his place. He threatened me that he didn't care if he lost the company anymore. He just wanted me, and if I didn't get there that evening and spend the night with him, he swore that he would send the video to Steve, and to even add more scariness to his threat, he forwarded the video to me to see again, even though I knew exactly what was in that video. So I quietly gathered all my stuff together and I left to Chris's place instead of going to the restaurant where Steve was obviously waiting for me. I switched off my phone too. I didn't want Steve calling me just so I didn't have a change of mind. I went to Chris and let him do the things he wanted to do to me and with me. But what he didn't know was that I got some sleeping medications while going to his place, and I added it to his drink after he was done with me. He slept off almost immediately, and I managed to use his fingerprints to unlock the video, and I deleted it everywhere. I was done being his sex slave, and I didn't want him to destroy my marriage. The next morning, I left before he even woke up, and went back home with excuses in my head. I was going to lie and tell Steve that my friend ended up in the hospital and my battery died before I could remember to call him. But Steve wasn't at home when I got home. When he eventually showed up in the evening and I gave him my perfect explanation, he said nothing, just went to take a shower and went out again. Steve behaved oddly for days before he finally accepted my apology and told me to keep away from my friend, especially since she doesn't want help. I told Steve that I was finally ready to be the next CEO of the company, and he was happy and started trying to put everything in place. Everything was perfect, finally. Chris couldn't threaten me with the video he had because I managed to delete it, and I didn't allow him to touch me anymore, and I spent all my spare time with my husband when he wasn't busy himself. Life was finally good, and I could finally relax and be truly happy. But that happiness had only lasted a few weeks after a month before I found out about the devastating news. I was pregnant, and it most definitely wasn't for Steve because when I calculated it, Steve and I only resumed having sex after about a week to our anniversary, so it wasn't possible that I was pregnant for Steve, and to even confirm more, I went to an hospital secretly, and I was confirmed pregnant, and it was only 7 weeks, which confirmed that it was definitely not for Steve. I felt so stupid. I had been with Chris all of those years and still hadn't gotten pregnant. I was always smart enough to take precautions because I was scared of getting pregnant, especially because Chris never used protection. He would always say it's offensive to his manhood to cover it with some cheap rubber when he wanted to use it. It was the reason his wife was having their 3rd kid with barely a year difference between the kids, but I was always wise to use the birth control pill. I never missed it, but for some weird reason, perhaps because I was too concentrated on getting rid of the evidence, or maybe I was too relaxed in my victory and I forgot the most important thing. I wanted to get rid of the baby, but the doctor refused to help me because, according to him, it was against his policy as a doctor and against the hospital rules too. And in my distraught, I forgot to dispose of the result of the test I had done in the hospital, and only remembered when I was confronted with it a day later in Steve's hand, holding it up like it was a piece of garbage, and with his eyes staring at me so coldly. I tried to lie that the baby is his, and I acted like I was going to surprise him with the news initially, and in my mind hoping and praying that Steve didn't calculate the date and figure things out. But that was exactly what had happened. He figured it out because he kept staring at me so coldly, as if deciding what to do with me. I tried to get Steve to talk to me. I knelt and apologized, and lied that it was a mistake. Some stupid one-night stand when I was drunk, and I didn't take the necessary precautions, but Steve said nothing. He just left me kneeling there and begging him to forgive me. The next 3 days passed slowly. Steve didn't come home and wouldn't pick his calls or respond to my messages. He was totally ignoring me, and I thought that if I waited it out that he would eventually come around, that maybe if he had some time to think, he would forgive me, and we would move on from there. I had no intention to keep the baby, so there was no question of raising the child together. I just wanted him to forgive me, but I was clearly delusional, because Steve's next line of action had been horrible. After those 3 days, I woke up to my phone blowing off from notifications from my social media and calls from my mom and my siblings. Even my friends were calling, and I didn't understand. Confused, I decided to check why my phone was giving off so many notifications, and what I saw made my blood grow cold. Steve had made a post. The video I thought I deleted of Chris, and I was out there for millions of people to see. And then there were also about 3 short clip videos, 2 of us having sex in the office, and the last thing he posted had been the result of the pregnancy test. The internet was going wild. Many headlines like "Billionaire Wife Caught Cheating with Her Boss Who's Married" was used to repost the videos and picture. Many bloggers were starting to use it as their topic, discussing how shameless I was, and there were more than millions of comments under each post, addressing me with different adjectives that I've never heard before in my life. The more vulgar, the more shocking it was to me. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I tried to go out of the house, but only to come into the sitting room to see 2 hefty men. One of them dragged me out, and the other had gone upstairs to take out my luggage. He packed all my clothes and shoes except all the gifts that Steve ever got me, all the jewelry that was expensive, the diamond earrings, the gold necklace, and even my very expensive wedding and engagement wedding rings were snatched off my fingers and added to the pile of things I couldn't leave with. I was so shocked, and I tried to take the car Steve bought me, but even that was taken away from me. Taking a cab had been embarrassing because I ended up not being able to pay. My banks were blocked and my cards were working anymore. Steve had them all blocked, and I ended up being totally embarrassed by the young cab driver, who called me a whore and told me to better go give myself to the next rich guy that came my way, instead of going about ripping people. I felt so ashamed of myself and tried to go into the apartment my family stayed in, but the apartment was locked, and it echoed too, like there was nobody living there. I tried reaching my mom, but she wouldn't pick my calls, and the same thing happened with my siblings. I had to trek the far distance from the apartment to our old house, dragging my bags behind me and covering myself with a hoodie and nose mask so no one recognized me, and it was extremely hot. But on getting there was nobody there either. I had to settle into the rather empty house because I had nowhere else to go. My family had disappeared all of a sudden, and I didn't know where to go. My world is crumbling right now. The hatred I have received over the last couple of days has been horrible, and I wish I could really change things. The last straw was getting the divorce papers mailed to me with different words like, no divorce settlement will be given, and I was to relinquish the deeds of the apartment back to Steve. I can do the other things written in the divorce letter. I don't care about the money and the apartment, but signing a divorce letter was like severing the only connection left between Steve and I cannot bring myself to do that. I don't even care about the internet's fussing. I just really desperately need Steve to forgive me. Please help me, guys. What can I do to get Steve to forgive me? Update. Hello, Reddits. My life is just total rubbish right now. I feel so choked up by the extent of my sins and the consequences backing it up. I know that I have lost the best thing that has even happened to me, and all because I was stupid and greedy. I don't know what I was thinking sticking to that coward Chris. How could I have thought that everything will work out for my good when all I have ever done was ruin everything right from the start? I thought I could perfectly hide something as staining as an affair, but I had forgotten karma. I regret so many things, and the biggest regret is losing Steve, and the second would be ever allowing Chris to destroy my marriage. Chris had definitely not been left out of Steve's revenge. He was also fired by the board of directors, and he was replaced by a worker at the lower level at the office. And Steve is apparently presently supporting his wife with everything she needs to win the custody of their kids, and also get a divorce. His support doesn't even have to be much, especially when the evidence is out there for the public to see. I've been called all sorts of names both on the internet and right where I am right now. People avoid me like a plague, and I have become the most talked about person there. No one wants to give me a job because they're scared of being pulled into my sin. Everyone wanted absolutely nothing to do with me, including my own family, who I haven't seen since that day, and they still wouldn't take my calls or respond to my texts either. My life is totally ruined, and it's all because I was foolish enough to believe that I could control everything. I could control my relationship with Steve and also with Chris. I could have both men together and still not get discovered. I feel so ashamed of myself right now, and all I can do in their empty and cold apartment is cry and regret. I regret ever knowing Chris or doing the things I did with him, and I regret ever lying to Steve throughout our whole relationship. It's sad that I came here as my last hope, thinking and praying desperately that even if not all but someone out there somewhere will understand that I messed up and I'm willing to change. I came here hoping that even if it's just one advice I got so I could get Steve back, I would be eternally grateful. But sadly, I got nothing but shame and cruel comments. I know I deserve all that is coming to me. I know that I'm a horrible person, and I know I don't deserve to find peace, even though I desperately want to. But you guys just made it even worse. My thoughts are so messed up right now, even the right therapist wouldn't be able to get past anything. I feel so depressed and lonely, and the feeling keeps growing rapidly each day. The baby that made Steve find out about the whole thing is no longer in my tummy. Perhaps having to go hungry and starve until I'm able to sell a dress for cheaper to get some money to eat wasn't pleasing for the baby. Or maybe it was the constant thinking that got it out. But either way, the baby isn't there on my tummy, and I still have nobody. No Steve, no family, and no friends. I feel so hideous, and I keep wishing for some sort of way to go back in the past and undo the damage I've managed to cause. I wish that I hadn't met that coward who has not even had the sense of decency to ask about me and the baby he put in my tummy, and was responsible for everything that was happening with his consistent and persistent habit of having sex all the time. Now that I have no one, including the baby, I feel even more depressed. I have nothing to look forward to. If I ever had the chance to go back into the past to change something, it would definitely be meeting him at all. I definitely would have survived in school if I hadn't met him, and I would have survived if I didn't work in his company, because that had even been more hazardous than actually just staying with him in school. I wish I had some way to undo this. I wish I could somehow just go back to being Steve's lover and wife, and faithfully so. I wish that I would get a second chance with Steve, but then, I know how impossible that is, but it still doesn't stop my every breath from wishing it was true. This is my last post here, guys. I hope you all don't end up like me, sad, miserable, and with no hope, none at all, for the future. Thanks and goodbye.